Last year you had Grape Shot on stage, and not that we're doing anything soon, but my name is Mark Goldberg, Trust Metrics. This next panel is another acronym. It's GDPR, and Mr. Rob Beeler, the man, the myth, the legend, can come up here. Mr. Nerd Monster, I guess I would call you. Ad Monster. Oh, my bad.
I appreciate that,
All
though.
good. Have fun, make it enjoyable, and I will see you soon.
We'll do what we can. Thank you, Mark. So, Rob Beeler, mostly known for Ad Monsters. I do a lot of work with 614 Group. I do my own events. Part of what I try to do is find conversations, critical conversations, and kind of move them forward. Panel, you can come on up. GDPR was something that, if I talked early last year and said, who wants to talk about GDPR? I'd get a few sprinkles here and there. There were a couple people that were onto it. Last year, obviously, at this time for this particular event, GDPR was a very big topic amongst a certain group. But even then, programming events to talk about GDPR was still difficult because people really just didn't want to talk about it. As May 25th got closer, the intensity grew, and suddenly GDPR was a daily topic. And then the conversation started to slow down at that point, right? I think the only other date I can think of that's important for GDPR is December 25th. Santa Claus has been working on his list, checking it twice, seeing who's naughty or nice. We'll see whether that works out. All right, I was put up to that joke, and unfortunately, none of you could opt out. The save on the GDPR joke. All right, fantastic. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what GDPR is now. Like it's business as usual. How does it kind of affect our daily jobs and so forth? And I've got a panel from 3 different parts of the industry. And what I'm going to ask of our panel is introduce the name and the title and the company. Let's get that particular piece. And then I'm going to circle back and want to talk a little bit more about actually what it is that you do. And then we'll relate that to how it works to GDPR. All right, so Lisa, we'll start with you.
I'm Lisa Lutz. I work for TiVo. I am VP of Product for the AMA Group, which is the Advertising, Media, and Analytics team out in Boston, Massachusetts.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Glasser. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer for Wonderman. For those of you who don't know, Wonderman is we're a creative agency. We do data and analytics. We host client databases. Really anything you can think of, we will handle.
I'm Summer Simpson. I'm a product director for Quantcast. If you don't know Quantcast, we do AI-driven insights on audiences and targeting.
Okay. So we'll come right back the same way. So Summer, what are you doing on a daily basis? What does that job really entail?
Running around with my fingers in my ear.
Yeah, exactly.
Trying not to hear GDPR anymore.
I used to ask the question, how do you explain to your mother what you do or whatever? I found that never gets us anywhere. But to someone else in the industry that goes like, no, what does that actually mean? What do you do?
So when I first started answering that question, it was a very long answer, right? Yeah. Very convoluted. Now I just tell people I'm keeping the internet free.
Okay.
Basically, right? So keeping people's access to free news and information free, because that's what we do. I mean, as an ad industry, digital advertising, and I wouldn't say GDPR is a threat to that. Although a lot of people, when we started getting closer to the date, people started talking about GDPR. That's how they kind of really saw it. I and like a lot of the folks that I worked with, and certainly the whole group from IAB, really kind of embraced it as an opportunity to kind of clean up some of the behavior that caused GDPR in the first place. So that's just how we've approached it from the beginning. Quantcast has always been privacy by design since its founding, and that's the attitude that we took into the project of getting compliant, which really didn't take that long, so
all right.
Which is good.
We'll get back to that too. All right.
I don't run with my fingers in my ears just because I'm not that coordinated. But if I could, I probably would. I handle a lot of different things. Probably the most top level is really just general compliance and privacy by design and making sure we're staying on the right side of the law. I get questions from, how can we use this type of data, or can we use data in a certain way, all the way to we need to revamp our entire contracting system. So it could really vary depending on the
And
day.
is that really GDPR driven, or when you're a compliance officer, you are also other regulations and other
Sure.
things?
Yeah, sure. So GDPR is probably the biggest one.
Okay.
And when I say compliance, I should probably narrow that to more privacy, data protection, data ethics, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Things like SOX and all that, and I don't want to be bothered with. But GDPR is definitely probably the crux of all of that, or the jumping off point for all of that, because a lot of the other stuff is kind of followed after the fact. So
Got it.
that's probably the biggest thing at the moment.
Got it.
Okay, so I'm not actually in the compliance and security spectrum. I'm actually in the product world. So I run the product division for the analytics team. So we take advantage of our data that we collect from our millions of houses, and we apply that for analytics for advertising purposes. So we allow you to find that audience on TV or on digital. So I basically create products that have data insights and targeting capabilities.
Got it. So, Summer, you probably create meetings about GDPR. Rich, you're always talking GDPR. And Lisa, you're going, oh no, someone put a meeting that says
Exactly.
GDPR in it. Would that be an accurate statement? All right, cool. We got the whole spectrum. I'll ask actually of everyone in the audience. So, go back a year, January. Were you talking about GDPR on a daily basis? How many people? Okay. May of this past year, were you talking about GDPR on a daily basis? Okay. And now, are you talking about it on a daily basis? Joe is, of course. Yep. All right. How about a weekly basis? Monthly basis? Everyone else just avoids it. If it comes up, just go the other way. Okay, that's cool. Good to be admired. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the thing with this, right? Is that GDPR came. Actually, Summer and I were at the IAB Europe event. We watched it come in, happen. The actual moment GDPR went in place. Toasted to it. Played Europe's The Final Countdown, the whole thing, and then it just was quiet from then, right? I mean, at least quiet on certain fronts. I think for all of us. What are you all actively doing now around GDPR? If you have all these meetings and so forth, what is that about?
I mean, well, first of all, I think it's kind of a mistake that people stopped talking about it, because it wasn't something that came and you did and it went and it's done. It's like May 25th was the beginning, right? And even before May 25th, there were privacy laws, right? E-privacy regulation, Canada has laws, Australia has laws, and then post 25th, now we've got California and Vermont, so it's not going anywhere. It is just the new state of things, or newer state of things, I guess, where our attention needed to be gotten, and now it's here, right? So we've really got to pay attention to consumer privacy and privacy rights, and do a lot of work on that. So it's really my job and the job of some of my colleagues that are here with me today to basically, inside the company, make sure that everybody is constantly aware of it, right? And make sure they're following the practices that we put into place, right? You only collect the data that you actually need to use to do your job, and you don't store it longer than you need to store it. And when you do store it, you store it well and secure and protected, and that's it. And so we just kind of stay on top of that constantly, and watch as the laws change, because now we've got e-privacy directive coming.
Oh yeah. We're going to touch on that too. How about yourself in terms of just
What she said. No.
what she said?
Yeah, really similar. I think for me right now, the biggest challenge is making sure everybody who is not one of our GDPR coordinators, or who maybe hasn't been quite as involved in our GDPR compliance program, but making sure that they know May 25th was not a due date and now it's over and done. This is an ongoing process. You are going to have to build this into your everyday practice. It should become like second nature, the same way all of your other processes and procedures are. And it's something that should be embraced. I think once people sort of realize, oh, this is real, it's not going away, it was like, okay, well, how do we make this work for us instead of against us? So those are some of the biggest things really that we've done, is just making sure that this is sort of second nature for everybody. How has this put us in a better place to accommodate things like California and Vermont And how do we just kind of take these things in stride and look at them as a positive instead of, oh no, you're trying to ruin the industry. And there'll be challenges and things will be hard, but maybe at the end of the day, it's not such a bad thing because it'll help us weed out some of the bad actors that have put us in this position. And it'll help the good actors shine and continue to be good stewards of data and good actors and responsible actors in the industry. Maybe people won't blame advertising for everything, but that's sort of a pipe dream down the road.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves here.
Honestly, I mean, we're like the least of the bad actors at this point.
I
mean,
completely
some of the
agree,
stuff that's going on is like, it's egregious, it's insane. Like the more I dig into things, but the thing is, it's like, nope, we're not done. Like there's only like what 17, 18% of the top 10,000 websites are actually compliant. They have any sort of like consent management tool in place. And not even all of those are transmitting that user's consent signal in a way that vendors like us can understand it and see if we have consent. So like the internet is not even close to being compliant with the law.
Or even in a way that would arguably be compliant with the law. Like, so accepting consent before a cookie or a device ID is actually collected. So there's a couple of things to work out.
Well, and so I guess I go back to my initial piece of this in terms of the amount of conversation that's happening around it, right? I mean, I'd almost argue that because it's European regulation, certainly Americans are spending less attention even though it impacts them, right? But they've kind of in their California will hold that off for the side. But that it's the kind of regulation that it takes some precedent to be set to actually decide how it's going to be informed. In other words, we all have the regulation, and again, I don't think anyone jumps at the idea of reading European regulation. It's not a great read, but it's there, and it's a little bit loose on certain things for interpretation. That interpretation will happen in the courts. So for the most part, people are kind of wait and see, which creates that it felt like a due date, and now it's really hard to kind of move along. But would you agree that like we are kind of in that wait and see? Like in other words, to your points of just kind of like moving things forward, it's hard to when you kind of know that you're not exactly sure how this is all going to play out. How do you work in that environment?
Yeah, some people are doing a wait and see, and I think it's a big mistake because this is about consumer privacy. It's not about like your business and business as usual, right? I mean, it's like a lot of conversations that I've had with other companies and people kind of like holding back and waiting and seeing what how things are to go and talking to publishers. They're concerned. Their agenda is themselves, right? Their agenda is their company, which makes sense because we've got to stay in business and do what we're going to do. But fundamentally, it's about consumer rights, and we all need to be paying attention to that and following the law. And if we just did it and got compliant, we wouldn't be here where we are in the first place, right? So, there's still quite a lot to be done. I think the wait and see is going to stop soon, right? As soon as Google gets it together and gets on the IB framework, like they said they were going to do for the past 6 months or so, maybe more, that'll be good because then that'll put some real pressure on publishers.
I want to get back to that one because I want to understand what that impact would be and so forth. Lisa, I want to ask you, like, so again, you knew of the May 25th. I know you have the compliance officers, but as someone that's helping with your business with TiVo, you did a lot of work to get ready, and was that work worthwhile?
So I think for us, advertising kind of went through this whole concept of like, oh my gosh, there's going to be no data around, right? Because everything's going to go away with the cookies and I'm not going to be able to advertise and my world's going to fall apart. In reality though, I think like the physical collection hasn't changed, but what has changed is basically the security went from the back office to the front office, right? And what it's enabling advertisers to do now is to have people opt in to their marketing and their promotions, which is now increasing their opportunity for conversion and for retention because you have a guaranteed pool of interested people who have indicated that they want your product, right? And so while your CPMs may in fact go up because you have a smaller pool, your waste is going to go down, and you now have a pinpoint set of people who are interested in your offering. So reality is that first-party data, I think, is going to become highly valuable and acted on, and kind of take away from that third party, which is what we've been dependent upon for so long. So ultimately, I'm not sure it's a bad thing. I think like this whole, like the world's gonna fall apart from advertising may have been the wrong approach actually could be a nice opportunity to have true transparency.
Yeah, again, I think some of you saw that and knew there would be an end to this, or like a silver lining to all of this. But it was, for a lot of people, it was that scramble, like, I just don't even know ads will work anymore as of that particular date. You know, you hit on something, and just something that popped in my head is, you know, the tag research that I worked on and talking with people. One of the things that was really interesting is that when I asked people for getting tag compliance, they're like, yeah, these are things we already do, but it does help the conversation internally to go that there's some understanding of what happens here. And I almost feel like that's something of one of the positives here, right, with GDPR is someone had to wrap their head around it and talk internally and go, we just can't throw data around willy-nilly. We've got to actually have some structure around it. And so in terms of people you're working with, to whether they internally or some of your clients, did that happen? And is it continuing happening where people are starting to actually map out their data, know what they're doing, and getting better at it? Do you feel like you've done that?
I definitely think within our product that we've always been very conscientious of the data that we have and the whole PII information. And in fact, we utilize safe haven so as to not to store PII as previously defined. So I think there's always been that conscientious effort to sort of be aware of data. Right? Having grown up in sort of this industry of PII, I think that we're all aware of it. And I think, like I said, the good actors have been pretty good. It's the bad actors that have to really change their... Right. And not to say that we're good enough, but I think it's a starting point.
Yeah.
It's how you think.
Did it help you internally in terms of maybe, I don't know, GDPR becomes the boogeyman? You get to say we're going to have guys in berets come out of the ceilings and arrest us all and charge us $20 million or whatever. Did that help you?
Yeah, it helped a little bit, you know, and you kind of actually put 4% of your global revenue into a number and you say, well, it's not our number, it's our parent company's number. You know, the eyeballs get a little bigger and people kind of freak out a little. But I think what scares them even more is that another avenue of recourse for regulators is to order you to cease processing activities, which is sort of like just shutting down your business, right? So in that respect, you might actually be better off with a fine. So, you know, I think when people start to realize, like, I don't want to be on the hook for that, I don't want to be the reason why we have to stop our business. You know, I don't think anybody willingly doesn't want to help or participate, at least not in my experience. I think you just need to kind of wake them up a little bit and, you know, really explain like what the real risk is. It's not just about money. It's not just about stopping your data processing. It's about your company reputation. You know, do you want to be that guy who's sort of like the first enforcement action or even the 10th enforcement action? You kind of want to avoid those headlines altogether. You know, there's no real incentive for not doing the right thing when it comes to some of the data protection laws and some of the new regulations that are sort of being talked about and bubbling up. So
I have this idea of a call, you know, earnings report. It's like we're down 4% revenue, and it's like, why, Rachel?
Right.
Like, you don't want to be that person. Actually, the one that did that. Summer, you know, again, it's interesting. Like for me, Quantcasts, you know, and what I knew Quantcasts to do. And then kind of really the jumping on GDPR and helping with that framework, you know, was not something I would have naturally sat there and thought of. And yet you've been one of the companies that have really kind of led that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, really kind of pushed on that. Are your clients, like, I guess there's multiple questions there.
Yeah.
I guess I'll go with just like, when did you see that kind of opportunity? Yeah. You know what? You know that there are many questions off that. Which one do you want to take? Go ahead and answer that.
So for Quantcasts, I mean, doing anything related to GDPR was a no-brainer. I mean, we just were like, oh, okay, yeah, it's a new law that it's coming in. So yeah, we just did it, right? Getting in with, we're on multiple IAB boards, involved in a lot of the organizations, and we saw that the group who was the working group that was with IAB Europe kind of talking about GDPR and what they were going to do about it had weekly hour phone calls every week for a year and didn't really make a lot of progress. We're like, guys,
yeah,
we got to go. Like, so we just jumped in, pulled together, got everybody pulled together, so we have to solve this, right? There has to be a tech solution. Came up with a solution, built it in a week or a proof of concept, and then we were the first CNP that got launched and rolled out along with AppNexus. And it took us less time to actually build it and solve the problem than to talk about it for a while. So that was interesting.
A note for the future for solving problems is
Right.
sometimes just go ahead and
Right,
do it
just
and
do
then
it, yeah.
get everyone else on board. Right.
But that, I mean, getting the industry on board, because I mean, a lot of folks are good players, and everybody at the table, like, you know, Google and Oath and AppNexus and MediaMath and like everybody, these are like good players, right? They want to do what's right. The next hardest thing was going out and convincing a lot of the publishers
Right.
that they needed to do something. Those folks that we were all dependent on to get consent so that we could actually place our cookies so they could use our products. Then we realized, oh crap, we have to do the same thing with advertisers because they also have websites and they also have tracking and they're going to get consent as well. So that's been kind of an uphill battle. We hit the 25th and we had a spike in people installing the consent tools, and then it has kind of leveled off, and I think another spike will come along as well once we have a few other folks join the framework, and
Kinda
that'll
get
take
there.
off again.
Yeah.
People will realize it's real, like, and they've got to do something about it.
I think there is definitely for, you know, again, I'm more publisher ad operations focused or whatever, and there is a part of some people have gone to work this problem and others are just definitely sitting back and just at some point we'll get a call and then we'll figure out what we're going to have to do, which is a shame.
But I think it's something that everyone really kind of forgets in this world of, you know, compliance or new data protection regulations, is that it's not just one party's problem. It's not just, you know, third-party technology companies' problem. It's not just data companies' problem. It's everybody's problem. And, you know, it's the clients need to be aware of it, the publishers, the third-party tech. Everyone really needs to play a certain role, and it's about how do you manage the risk through those different parties, right? So, you know, maybe there are certain publishers where the risk is smaller to not have a consent management platform. Maybe they don't need it, depending on what type of data collection is happening on their website. But you know, it's not an island. You're not there by yourself. You need a little cooperation from everyone.
Yep.
I think one good thing that happened for publishers is the combination of ads.txt and this allowed them to sit there and start looking at what their tech stack was and realizing they didn't know everyone that was involved,
Yeah.
and then putting a value on it, right? So in other words, oh, they're grabbing all my data. Do I just like make that part of my compliance, or do I reassess whether I actually need to work with this company? Do they generate revenue for me, or are they just grabbing data? Which I think is always a good conversation.
And that's the biggest request that we've gotten from publishers. So a lot of the publishers that rolled out our CMP solution, that was their next biggest ask was, can you tell me who's placing cookies and stuff on my site?
Yeah.
So we just launched this week a new version of our CMP that is going to have that in it.
That has that kind of
So,
reporting.
yeah, so you start to see like they in fact, publishers are coming along faster in wanting and having this desire to have transparency and understand what's going on with their users, more so than even the users themselves. The users see this value exchange, right? And they're like, I want to read this article. I don't want to have to pay to read this article, so of course I'll look at some ads. No big deal. Yes, that's why we're seeing like consent rates in like, you know, above 90% across the board.
Yeah, and everyone knows that, right? I mean, that's the consent rate is something we all were waiting to see.
Yeah.
You know, I think the predictions before was 5%.
Oh, they were. Yeah, I was hearing like 15, 20%. I had a
I
bet.
was hearing like 2.5%.
Oh my
lower
God.
than
That's
lower
crazy.
than some of the consent rates some companies were seeing when Castle in Canada was implemented,
Yeah.
which I thought was like a little
Yeah,
ridiculous.
I had a bet with our CEO that we would hit 60%, and then here I come
I hope you
walking in,
bet high.
come walking in with like our first report, and it's like 90-something%. It's like we're good.
Mic drop, boom.
Yeah.
At the same time, when we were prepping for this call or this session, Rachel, you talked about the consistency and just in terms of like how this is going to be applied, right? And so I think that might be an interesting topic to kind of delve into your perspective of how GDPR is going to be used. I shouldn't quite say it that way, but it does feel that way because there are going to be certainly people that get hit with this and others that may not. And I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I think it's really going to depend on the individual company and what they do and how they apply it. So I know there are many companies who are applying GDPR as a global standard. Many that are still operating in very regionalized fashions because it's easier for them to monitor and maintain compliance as they've implemented it. but I see a lot of repositioning of tools and platforms that have sort of emerged from GDPR for things to prepare for, like California.
Yeah.
And I think if anything, what GDPR has done, regardless of how you implement it and your compliance program, and regardless of how you sort of try to adhere to the different parts of the regulation, I think one thing it's done is it's caused companies, especially data and tech companies, to really step back, do a little spring cleaning, assess what's going on, what technology they're using, what data they're using. And that's like a huge start for knowing how you need to approach California, updating your disclosures. A lot of these things are principles we should have been doing anyway. Being more transparent than we actually are, and being transparent in a way that people will understand. And we talked a little bit about how we get very confusing and how we describe things to people. And if we're embarrassed about what we're doing, we probably shouldn't be doing it. Or if we feel uncomfortable about describing it, we shouldn't be doing it, or probably something's wrong. So I think some of these, I'll save my line for the end.
Chuckle, but there's a part about being in this industry and going like, if you don't feel comfortable, you're like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I once had someone say to me, and I won't say when or who or about what, but it was with regard to data and talking to someone relatively high profile, and I was running it by this certain group, and they said, oh, actually we like to typically hang back in the shadows on this stuff. And I said, you realize that is literally the definition of shady, right? I don't want to ever hear that again, So there's a little bit, I know they didn't mean it that way, but they kind of just felt like, well, the less attention we bring to ourselves, the less we have to worry about getting caught in something we didn't know was going on. And that also isn't the right approach. We should know exactly what's happening in our business, or at least make an effort to know what's happening in our business. And I think, some of the basics like transparency, checking your privacy policies, checking up on your vendor management platforms or consent platforms, and who you're working with. I think those are basic fundamentals that we should be applying regardless of GDPR, and they're going to just become more and more important as we see California move along, as Vermont.
Yeah.
January 31st rolls around for Vermont, and your registration requirements if they apply to you. So if you start doing this stuff, I think you're in a better place to accommodate future changes.
Well, yeah, I want to delve into that too. Lisa, is California on your list? Are you? Because you're not the compliance person, are you starting to hear and
So I know
have
that
those?
our compliance team is definitely well aware of the California
Yeah.
Act, and so they're on it. I don't know anything more specifically.
Do you think, with all of this, to what Rachel just said, that your proposition to your clients, the people that use TiVo, that this data conversation is going to turn into a positive of them understanding that, again, if you trust us with your data and we have this exchange and you know what's happening or whatever, that again, you're going to be able to even more personalize their experience and grow with what TiVo can do for them, right? Is that not the silver lining with this?
I think that is for anybody, right? I think there's definitely a concept of trust, right? And making sure that you have, you're a clean player, so to speak, that you're up in front about how you're collecting your data. That's important to be honest and open and have that trust with your partners, because it all comes down to, hey, if I'm doing something wrong and you're consuming it, then you're doing something wrong, right? So we all have to play together fairly and honestly, and definitely something that we'll always do, right?
So we talked about California a little bit. So this is the post-GDPR session. So will next year we be doing the post-GDPR, California, Vermont session, or other states as well? So is it going to break out by state? Do we think federal is going to come in and try to streamline this? What are your predictions kind of going forward with how this is going to roll out? The smiles I get for a question like that.
I'm going to expose my politics
Wait,
a little
before
bit.
you say anything, should we get a
Yeah,
poll
let's talk-
going to see who's closest? About
Right.
what happens actually.
Yeah, right.
Keep it interesting, guys.
State races, yes.
Yeah. I don't think anything's going to happen federal. Just saw what happened with the elections.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen. California, the internet doesn't have state borders, right? So whatever happens in California is probably going to spread. Unfortunately, California doesn't go nearly as far as GDPR. If you start to compare it, it doesn't even go nearly as far as the e-privacy regulation. It's an opt-out, not an opt-in. Like companies aren't required to get people's consent. They just, it's more like data access rights, breach protection, and people being able to opt out of their data being collected or sold. I think it could go a little bit further.
So in other words, do you feel like if you prepare for GDPR, so in other words, it won't be the GDPR/California/Vermont thing. It's going to be, again, data regulation, right? And just going to be that there might be some flavors or nuances that you need to be aware of.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for 50 versions of compliance type tools. But I also agree.
It's all going to converge, I think, into one kind of global thing because Australia is watching GDPR. Hopefully they will do it a little bit better. Same with Canada. So eventually it's all going to kind of converge into one reasonable kind of law, I think.
Yeah.
And you've got Brazil that's passed their LGPD, and which is like the, I guess, the Portuguese initials sort of GDPR.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez,
Yeah.
Lord. Okay.
Although Bolsonaro.
Yeah.
So first of all,
Exactly.
because I took up all the time with my questions, are you all three going to be around for the break, just in case people have questions? I'm sorry I kind of took all that. I would just as the last couple minutes here, just as a quick, how often are you going to be talking about GDPR in this coming year? Is it going to continually be? I think I know the answer to this, but is it going to be a focus? And what are your plans for 2019 around this? Just keep plugging. Anyone got anything?
A really long vacation.
What?
A really long vacation.
Long vacation. All right.
I am going to still talk about GDPR because I love it and I've embraced it. And for anyone who has trouble sleeping, get an app called the Comm App.
Yes.
It's actually, they sell a GDPR module where there's a famous person, he's got like a recognizable voice, and he reads the
it.
GDPR as a sleep module.
It's
You
awesome.
know,
So, true story, if anybody wants to see, I could show it to you on my phone. So.
somehow I sat there and when I bombed the ending here in terms of setting up for a fun, and you killed it. That's awesome. I will download that app. Thing like that. Thank you very much for the panel.
Thank you, guys.